As far as automakers go, Subaru and Mitsubishi have been inextricably linked for a long time. For gearheads like me, the STI versus Evo rivalry was really something special and helped put both brands on the map. Nowadays, about the only place these two compete is right here in the city, with crossovers like the Crosstrek and RVR. So which one's best? That's what we're here to find out. Now, before we head out for some driving impressions, I just thought we'd take a look at these things side by side. And as you can tell, in terms of outward appearances, they do look pretty different. Where the Crosstrek started life as a small car that got jacked up suspension and some extra body cladding, the RVR was designed to be an SUV from the start. But just like 2 + 2 = 4 and so does 3 + 1, these things use different equations to reach the same conclusion. And when you look at the dimensions on paper, they are pretty much identical inside and out. And that's especially true behind the hatch. Now, there's about 600 liters in each of these things with the rear seats up. It's a nice and square opening, tons of room for weekends away or groceries. Now, if you fold the back seats, the Crosstrek does have a slight leg up, but it's pretty much a draw when it comes to carrying around your stuff. Now, I usually like to start these comparisons in whichever vehicle's the newest, and that's the RVR in this case, but that is a bit of a generous statement, and this thing's been on the market for a decade now. This 2020 version has undergone a facelift, and that's the fourth one Mitsubishi has given the RVR over the years. So it's got a bit more of a bolder front end and some new features inside, but we'll get to those in a little bit. So since we're inside, let's talk a little bit about this space. And you know, it definitely doesn't feel like a 2020 vehicle inside and really feels like a 2010. A lot of the plastics in here just feel cheap compared to other competitors in this segment, especially the Crosstrek. And they're just outdated. That goes for the switch gear as well. Some of the switches in here just don't really look or feel up to snuff for a 2020 vehicle. The plastics on the dash and the door panel, just not very good. You know, the same goes for the build quality, and it's just not up to standards I would expect or I would want to pay for. This thing is over 30 grand. The one we're driving, the fully loaded GT model, it's well into the mid-30s. And for that money, you definitely are paying for a vehicle that feels a lot more like a Kia 10 years ago than a Mitsubishi in 2020. There's a lot of creaks and rattles in the dash. Over streetcar tracks here in the city, it just really generates a lot of noise, and it's pretty disappointing. I had really high hopes for this vehicle, but it was a big letdown. Now, in terms of these seats, they are leather in this GT trim, and they are heated, which is standard in all RVR models. They're pretty comfortable and supportive, and as you can see, I've got a pretty good amount of headroom. There's a bit more than what you get in the Crosstrek, and that's thanks to this fixed glass sunroof panel. Now, I was a little bit thrown at first that you can't open this sunroof, but I actually like it. I don't open my sunroof very often, so what's the point in offering that feature? And I think it's perfectly fine the way it is. Now, the story on space here is the same in the Crosstrek and the same in just about any other vehicle in this segment. No, you're not going to want to carry 4 adults with any frequency, but you can do it in a pinch. The back seats are best reserved for kids though. Now, the RVR does have automatic climate control, so it's got that going for it, but you do have to use these knobs that don't actually display the temperature anywhere, so you kind of have to guess. That's especially troubling when you're out on the road and you need to keep your eyes on what's going on. When you adjust the temperature, well, it doesn't display it on any screen in here of what temperature you have to set at, so you kind of have to guess. Now, there's a similar dial in the Crosstrek, but the Crosstrek does display the temperature up on the monitor that's on top of the dash, so you don't have to take your eyes off the road for too long. There's a similar quirk with the cruise control system. You engage it with your thumb on the steering wheel just like pretty much any other vehicle, and it says that cruise control is engaged. But once you actually set it, well, it doesn't tell you that it's set, and it doesn't tell you what speed you have it set at, which I think is a bit of a strange choice in a vehicle in 2020. Now, speaking of that cruise control system, well, unlike the Crosstrek, it's not adaptive. And that's kind of the theme here. There are some safety features like blind spot monitoring, like automatic emergency braking, but it's kind of a half-baked system, and it's not as good as most other vehicles in the segment, especially the Crosstrek. It's just a little disappointing that, again, a vehicle that was updated for 2020 just hasn't been able to keep up with the technology trends that are pervasive in this entire industry. The other thing about this safety system that puzzles me a bit is that you can only get the few that are offered in this full Jam GT model. And that's just pretty weird, especially considering almost every other brand is offering them as standard fare. The Crosstrek has them standard in all automatic models, yet you can only get them in this fully loaded version, and again, it's not even a fully featured system. Now, the forward collision warning system in this vehicle is a little bit sensitive, but the same can be said about the Crosstrek. Moving on to some other features, new for this 2020 version is this standard 8-inch touchscreen. It is very basic, but I actually like it. For example, there's no navigation available, but I'm totally okay with that. And that's because Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standard on all RVR models. Mitsubishi was smart. Why even bother offering a native navigation system when Google Maps is going to do a better job anyways? Just plug in your phone and off you go. You've got CarPlay, you've got Android Auto, Google Maps, Apple Music, text messaging, and phone calls, all mirroring your phone right here on the screen. That's good stuff. Climbing inside this Crosstrek, it quickly becomes clear that it's a step above the RVR just in terms of overall quality and space. It has leather seats just like the RVR, and they're about the same in terms of feel, but everything else is just a little bit nicer in here. The materials, there's more soft touch materials. The plastics aren't quite as rough and cheap feeling. You know, the same goes for the features. It's got a heated steering wheel because we are in a fully loaded limited model. Now the RVR has that too. There's also automatic climate control, but in the Crosstrek it is dual zone in this top trim, whereas the RVR is only single zone. Now, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standard here just like they are in the RVR. One downside to this is that you do have to step up to the Sport model in order to get this 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system. Otherwise, you're stuck with a 6.5-inch unit. It's not the end of the world, but it's also not quite as nice to use. Now, either way, it runs a relatively recent version of Subaru's infotainment system. It's not the quickest out there, but it responds to touches and inputs pretty well. I usually just leave my phone plugged in, so I have my Google Maps, my Apple Music, and my messages all accessible without having to take my eyes off the road. It's a really nice feature, and I'll tell you, I would not buy a new car today without Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now, it doesn't take much to see that I am a little bit more cramped in here than I am in the RVR, but it's not a bad space. It's really the sunroof that cuts into the headroom the most, but I can still get pretty comfortable in here without feeling too constricted. Now, like I mentioned, there is a very well-featured safety suite in the Crosstrek. It's Subaru's EyeSight suite, and it features everything from automatic emergency braking front and back in the case of this loaded version, as well as adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, lane departure warning. It's decked out. Also new for 2020, Subaru has included its Telematics System in here. And that means you can automatically alert first responders in case you're in a collision, as well as contact concierge services to find things like hotels, restaurants, or points of interest. You can also do stuff like set boundary alerts and speed limit alerts on your phone for the kids, or set a curfew alert if you don't want them out past a certain time at night. In terms of ride quality and comfort, I would say the Crosstrek is one of the best in the segment. It's a little cushier than the RVR and a little softer, but that's okay, and I think people will actually like that more than the slightly stiffer ride you get in something like the Crosstrek or even the Hyundai Kona. Talking about the drivetrain a little bit, this is a Subaru after all, so all-wheel drive is standard and it's a full-time system. And that means all you need is a set of winter tires this time of year and you are good to handle just about anything you encounter. I would say the only real downside to the Crosstrek is what's under the hood. The 2-liter flat four, well, it's mostly fine around town, but otherwise, it's about the most gutless engine on the market. I'm telling you, this thing is slow as a dog. Now, Subaru has worked to fix that this year with the inclusion of its SI drive. And what that means is you can engage sport mode with the press of a button right here on the steering wheel when you need a little bit more throttle response. But the downside, of course, is that fuel consumption will increase, and that's something Subaru really has going for it in the Crosstrek. Even though it's got full-time all-wheel drive, this thing is great on gas. So anything that hurts that is just really not worth it in my opinion. And I think Subaru just needs a bit more of a beefier engine in this thing to match what's otherwise a fantastic vehicle. Now I'm back in the RVR and let's talk about this engine. I should point out that base models with front-wheel drive get a 2-liter just like the Crosstrek, and output is about the same, 148 horsepower to go along with about 145 pound-feet of torque. Now my version, this GT model, well, it's got a 2.4 liter and it is exactly the engine that a vehicle like this needs. Power is rated in the high 160s, but it's also really responsive. Get on the gas and it'll pass vehicles without a problem. Just like the Subaru, it's also got paddle shifters, so when you need to move down or up a gear, you can do that really quickly. No, there's no sport mode like what's offered in the Subaru, but that's totally fine because it doesn't really need it. Now, just like the Subaru, the engine here is mated to a continuously variable transmission. This one isn't quite as good as what you get in the Crosstrek, but it's not bad, and it's definitely not as bad as what you get in something like a Nissan. It knows where it needs to be most of the time, and again, you've got those paddle shifters when you need to overtake someone on the highway. Now, I will say the suspension here is just a little bit more rickety than what you get in the Crosstrek, and you really notice that around town. The damping just isn't quite as good, but again, that might be to your taste. If you like a ride that's a little bit more rigid, this is going to give you that. Like I mentioned when I was driving the Crosstrek, because that's a Subaru, it gets full-time all-wheel drive. Here you get a 4-wheel drive system that you can choose what mode you want it to be in. You can have it in front-wheel drive when you don't need that extra traction, but if you need it, you can put it in automatic 4-wheel drive or a full-wheel drive lock that gives you permanent 4-wheel drive. But that flexibility does not help fuel economy, and this thing is much worse on gas than the Crosstrek. Now, the Crosstrek is a bit of a wonderkind in that department, but this is pretty disappointing when it comes to gas consumption. For a quick recap, I like the RVR's engine output and simple infotainment system, and the reasonable amount of comfort and convenience features it comes with. But it loses marks for the short-change safety features, the bad build quality, and the poor fuel economy. When it comes to the Crosstrek, it's got a great safety suite, good interior features, and a pretty smooth ride, but it comes up short in terms of engine output and front seat headroom. You know, this contest wasn't quite a slam dunk for Subaru, but it was close. These two are only a couple $100s apart with freight and fees, with fully loaded versions like these ones setting you back about $36 grand, and comparable entry-level models costing about $28,000. No matter how you slice it though, the Crosstrek just feels like the better vehicle overall. Now, the RVR does have a leg up in the engine department, and they're pretty comparable when it comes to interior space. But the Crosstrek is just the better vehicle by a good margin, delivering more of what you want in a city-sized package. That's right, we've got some great videos coming up, including a cool comparison of the Jeep Cherokee versus the Jeep Compass. So make sure you subscribe to watch that video and all the rest as we bring you more from the experts at autoTRADER.ca.